What if I told you the technology in your hands today started as a series of tiny, groundbreaking discoveries? Welcome to the Brick by Brick podcast. Today, we're diving into the history of computers, how the first machines changed the world, and how each innovation brought us closer to the digital age we live in today. Ready to travel through time and uncover the evolution of technology? Let's get started.
All right, get ready because you asked for it. A deep dive into the entire history of computers. 5,000 years, that's what we're tackling, and we're hitting all the major milestones along the way.
It's going to be a wild ride, but we'll keep it fun. And you might be surprised, some of the ancient stuff is way more advanced than you think.
Yeah, I always pictured computers as, a fairly recent invention, but I guess the desire to calculate and keep track of information, well, that goes way back, right?
Absolutely millennia. And we often think about how computers have gotten smaller and smaller over time, but that miniaturization actually started with a need for portable calculation. Like the abacus, for instance. It's been around for, what, 5,000 years? Maybe more.
Oh yeah, the abacus. Used everywhere, right? Mesopotamia, ancient China, all over the place.
Pretty much, yeah. It was like the original pocket calculator.
It was, but I gotta admit, I always thought of it as, just a simple counting tool. Like, what's so sophisticated about sliding beads around on a frame?
Well, think of it less like a simple counting tool and more like an ancient spreadsheet. It was a way to manipulate numbers, perform calculations, and do it quickly. A real testament to just how ingenious people were way back then, finding ways to work with complex info, even without all the tech we have today.
I see, yeah. It's easy to underestimate the power of those early innovations.
For sure. But you want to talk advanced tech in ancient times. Let's jump ahead to ancient Greece.
Wait, ancient Greece. Okay, I'm picturing togas and sandals, not exactly silicone and circuits. What am I missing here?
All right, so picture this. It's 1901, and divers are exploring a shipwreck off the coast of Antikythera. They find something that just blows everyone's minds. A device made of bronze gears. And get this, it dates back to around 100 BCE. They called it the Antikythera mechanism.
The Antikythera mechanism, that name rings a bell.
It's not just some simple tool either. It was designed to predict eclipses and even track the dates of the Olympic Games.
Hold on, a computer from over 2,000 years ago that could predict eclipses. That's insane. I mean, how did they even figure out the mechanics of something that complex back then?
It's a total testament to just how incredible their astronomical knowledge and engineering skills were, right? The Antikythera mechanism is basically like a clockwork computer using these intricate gears to track the movements of celestial bodies. Really challenges what we think about how technologically capable those ancient civilizations were.
It does. Makes you wonder what other incredible inventions are still out there waiting to be discovered.
Who knows what's buried out there? But before we get too lost in ancient Greece, let's fast forward a bit. The period between this ancient tech and, what we consider computers today, there's a lot to unpack there.
Okay, yeah, let's bridge that gap. What were some of those key developments that led to the computer as we know it?
Well, a lot of the foundations of modern computing, we owe that to the Islamic Golden Age, roughly 8th to the 13th centuries.
Oh yeah, the Islamic Golden Age, sure. I know it was a hugely important time for scientific advancements, but how does that connect specifically to computers?
Think about it. The core components of computing, algorithms,
Right.
complex calculations, even the number zero itself. All of these originated or were really significantly advanced during that time period. The word algorithm, for instance, it actually comes from the name of a Persian mathematician, Al-Khwarizmi. He also played a key role in introducing the concept of zero to the west, which was revolutionary for math.
Wow, so these weren't just abstract ideas, they were really laying the groundwork for all the practical applications that would come later on.
Totally. Without these fundamental building blocks, the mechanical and later the electronic computers that we're familiar with today, those wouldn't have been possible. It's really a fantastic example of how scientific progress builds on itself across cultures and across time.
Building on ideas, that's a great way to put it. So let's move on to the 17th century. Is that when things really started getting mechanical? Literally.
That's when the gears started turning, literally. The 17th century, that's when you see the emergence of mechanical calculators.
Yeah.
Driven by gears and levers.
Okay, so we're still a long way from the computers we see in old movies, right? But we're getting closer. So who were some of the big players in this era of mechanical calculation?
One of the earliest pioneers, and this might surprise you, was a teenager named Blaise Pascal. Yeah, teenager. He invented a mechanical calculator called a Pascaline to help his father, who was a tax collector.
A teenager inventing a computer to do taxes. Sounds like some things never change.
Right, although I guess computer might be a bit of a stretch. It was definitely a far cry from what we use today.
Oh, for sure. I'm guessing the Pascaline was pretty limited compared to what we have now. What could it actually do?
It could perform addition and subtraction, which, let's be real, that was a huge step forward for automating those calculations.
Yeah, I can imagine. So was the Pascaline sort of a one-off invention, or did other people build on that idea?
Oh, it definitely inspired others. Later, in the late 17th century, Gottfried Leibniz, he took Pascal's work and went even further. He created something called the stepped reckoner.
The stepped reckoner, okay. And how is that different from the Pascaline?
It could perform multiplication and division. These early mechanical calculators, they were crucial steps toward the development of even more complex machines. And they set the stage for someone you've probably heard of, Charles Babbage.
Ah, Charles Babbage, the father of the computer, right. The analytical engine. I remember learning about that in school, but if I remember correctly, it was never actually built, was it?
That's right.
Yeah.
The analytical engine, he conceived it in the 1830s, and the idea was revolutionary. It was designed to be programmable, using punch cards for input, and could perform a whole range of calculations. Really an incredible concept for its time.
It was way ahead of its time. So why was it never actually built? What happened?
A couple of things. Funding issues were a big one, and just the sheer complexity of the engineering involved. Sadly, it was never completed during Babbage's lifetime.
So it was a brilliant idea, but technology just couldn't quite catch up yet. But hold on, you mentioned punch cards. Weren't those used much later with, like, those massive IBM computers?
You're totally right. The punch cards Babbage had envisioned, those were actually inspired by the jacquard loom, the textile loom invented in 1801 that used punch cards to create those intricate patterns in woven fabric.
I see. So even back then, they were borrowing and adapting ideas from different fields to make advancements in computing. That's pretty cool.
It is. That cross-pollination of ideas is a recurring theme in computer history. But speaking of borrowing ideas, there's one more figure we need to mention here. Ada Lovelace.
Ada Lovelace, of course, the world's first computer programmer. I know she collaborated with Charles Babbage, but what was her specific contribution to the analytical engine?
Ada Lovelace was a brilliant mathematician. She saw the potential of the analytical engine to go way beyond just number crunching. She wrote what are considered the first computer algorithms, basically the instructions for the machine to perform specific tasks. And what's even more remarkable, she even predicted that machines like this could one day be used to compose music, create art.
Wow, that's amazing. To think that someone back in the 1800s could envision the creative potential of computers.
I know, right? So ahead of her time.
Yeah.
Sadly, though, both Babbage and Lovelace died before they could really see their vision realized.
So their work laid the groundwork, but it was still a while before those ideas could actually be put into practice.
Exactly. While their work was groundbreaking, the technology just wasn't quite there yet to build truly programmable computers.
So what was the next big step? What happened after Babbage and Lovelace?
Well, as the 19th century went on, there was this growing need for faster and more efficient data processing. And that need led to the development of electromechanical devices, which paved the way for the first electronic computers.
Okay, electromechanical devices. Sounds interesting, but can you break that down for me a bit? How did they work and why were they such a big deal?
Think about it this way. It's like combining the precision of those mechanical gears with the speed and control of electricity. That's basically what these devices did. They used relays, which are electrically operated switches, to process information represented as electrical signals.
Okay, so kind of a hybrid approach, combining the best of both worlds.
Right. One of the key players here is Hermann Hollerith. In the late 1800s, he developed punch card tabulating machines, and those were used to process data for the U.S. Census.
Hermann Hollerith. Now that's a name I recognize. He's the guy who gave us punch cards, the bane of every student's existence.
He is. But those punch cards really revolutionized data processing, made it possible to handle massive amounts of information efficiently.
I guess I can't argue with that. And didn't his company eventually become IBM? Talk about a legacy.
You got it. IBM, a true giant in the computer industry. But those early punch card machines, they weren't just about the census. They laid the groundwork for electromechanical computers that would emerge in the early 20th century. And these new computers, they were driven by the increasing demands of government, businesses, and, well, unfortunately, war.
War. Right. It seems like it often accelerates technological development, even if it's for destructive purposes. How did World War II push the boundaries of computing?
World War II was a turning point, absolutely. They needed to crack enemy codes, calculate ballistic trajectories, process huge amounts of data, and all this led to the development of the first electronic computers. In Britain, there was this top-secret project called Colossus. It was developed to break the codes generated by the German Enigma machine.
Colossus, I've heard of that. That was a major breakthrough, right? Wasn't it one of the very first electronic computers?
It was. It used vacuum tubes instead of relays to process information.
Vacuum tubes, those were the precursors to transistors, right?
You got it. But as impressive as Colossus was, it was actually overshadowed by another computer that came out around the same time in the US, ENIAC. It was gigantic, weighed over 30 tons, and get this, it contained over 18,000 vacuum tubes.
18,000 vacuum tubes. I bet that thing generated a ton of heat. What was ENIAC used for primarily?
Its main purpose was calculating ballistic trajectories for artillery shells. But it could do so much more than that. It was what's called a general-purpose computer, meaning it could be programmed to perform a variety of tasks.
So like a very early multi-purpose computer. That's impressive.
Yeah, it was. But ENIAC had a major limitation. It had to be rewired for each new task.
Oh, I see. So it's like having this super fast calculator, but you have to practically rebuild it every time you wanted to solve a different equation. Not very efficient. How did they overcome that obstacle?
That's where John von Neumann comes in. He was this brilliant mathematician and physicist, and he proposed a revolutionary new architecture for computers, the stored program architecture.
Okay, the stored program architecture. That sounds like a big deal, but I need a bit of an explanation. What did it actually do?
Think of it like this. You have both the data you want to process and the instructions for processing it stored in the computer's memory. That's what the stored program architecture allowed. It meant that computers could execute a whole sequence of instructions, a program, without constantly needing to be rewired.
Wow, that's a game changer.
Yeah, it made computers so much more flexible, efficient, and powerful. Really opened up a whole new world of possibilities.
So that paved the way for modern computing as we know it.
It did. But there was still a big hurdle, the physical size and complexity of computers.
Right, we're still in the era of giant room-filling computers. What was the next big leap forward? When did computers start to shrink and become more accessible to the average person?
That brings us to what some consider the most important invention of the 20th century, the transistor.
Ah, the transistor. Now we're talking. I know it replaced those bulky vacuum tubes, but can you explain how that actually worked and why it was such a big deal?
Before the transistor, computers relied on those vacuum tubes, which were big, fragile, and generated a lot of heat. A transistor, it's essentially a tiny electronic switch that can control the flow of electricity. And the amazing thing is, it's incredibly small, efficient, and reliable compared to those old vacuum tubes.
So the transistor made it possible to miniaturize computers.
Exactly. But even with transistors, computers were still pretty complex and expensive.
I can imagine. So what was the next breakthrough that really made computers more accessible to everyday people?
The real revolution came in 1958 with the invention of the integrated circuit, or as we call it today, the microchip.
The microchip. Now things are getting really interesting. So what exactly is an integrated circuit and how did it change the game?
It's pretty mind-blowing, actually. Imagine shrinking an entire circuit board with all its transistors, resistors, capacitors, down to the size of your fingernail. That's what an integrated circuit does.
Wow. So basically packing a ton of computing power into a tiny space. That must have been a huge breakthrough.
It was. It allowed engineers to put thousands and eventually millions of transistors onto a single silicon chip.
Millions of transistors on a tiny chip. It's hard to even fathom. And is this where Moore's law comes in?
You got it. Gordon Moore, one of the founders of Intel, he observed in 1965 that the number of transistors they could fit on a microchip was doubling approximately every 2 years.
Moore's law. That's the idea that computing power keeps growing exponentially, right?
Exactly. And his prediction? It's held true for decades, driving the incredible growth in computing power and also the shrinking size of computers.
So from room-sized behemoths to something that could fit on a desk. That's incredible. And eventually, of course, we got computers that could fit in our pockets.
It's remarkable, isn't it? All thanks to that power of miniaturization and just that relentless pursuit of innovation in the computing world.
Absolutely. And all this shrinking size and increasing power, that really opened up a whole new world of possibilities for, well, everyone, especially hobbyists and entrepreneurs.
Yeah, and that brings us to the rise of the personal computer.
The PC. That's a story I'm excited to hear more about.
It's a fascinating one, full of colorful characters, intense competition, groundbreaking innovations. It's a story that takes us from those early days of tinkering in garages and hobbyist clubs all the way to the global tech giants and, well, the digital age we live in today.
Sounds like a story we need to dive into, but I think that's a good place to pause for now. We'll be back soon to continue our exploration of the history of computers, picking up with the birth of the personal computer.
All right, welcome back to our deep dive into computer history. We left off on the brink of the personal computer revolution. Before we get to those big names we all know, Apple, Microsoft, there was this whole DIY scene that basically kicked things off.
Yeah, we're talking about the Altair 8800, released back in 1975.
The Altair 8800. Okay, I'm not super familiar with that one. What was it like?
It wasn't what you'd picture when you think computer today. It wasn't this sleek machine with a monitor and a keyboard. It was a kit computer, a bunch of parts you actually had to assemble yourself.
A computer you had to build yourself.
Yes.
That's wild. And instead of a screen, it used, get this, blinking lights to display output.
Blinking lights, that's how you interacted with it.
Yeah, pretty
It
big.
sounds more like a science project than, a computer revolution.
It kind of was.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it got people excited about the possibilities. The Altair 8800, it proved there was a market for personal computers, even if they were, pretty bare bones.
So it was all about the potential.
Exactly. And two young programmers at the time, Bill Gates and Paul Allen, they saw that potential. They actually created a version of the basic programming language for the Altair, made it, actually usable.
Bill Gates and Paul Allen. Wow, so that was the start of Microsoft.
It was. But around the same time, there were these two other guys, also tinkering away in a garage.
You're talking about Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, right?
Of course. In 1976, they launched Apple Computer. And just a year later, they released the Apple II.
The Apple II. Now that's a name I recognize.
It was a game changer because it was designed for, everyday users. It had a keyboard, a monitor, color graphics. It actually looked like a computer we'd recognize today.
And the Apple II was a huge hit, right? It really brought computers into homes, schools, not just labs and universities.
Exactly. You could say it democratized computing.
Yeah.
Made it accessible, affordable, user-friendly. But, the PC market, it was really just getting started. In 1981, IBM, which had been focused on mainframe computers, they decided to jump into the PC market with their IBM PC.
The IBM PC. Yeah, I remember hearing about that. It really became the standard for businesses, didn't it? What made it so successful?
Well, one key factor was their decision to use an operating system from this little company called Microsoft,
Yeah.
MS-DOS. And that created this open architecture system, meaning other companies could manufacture compatible computers and software.
Ah, so it was like setting a standard, creating this universal language for personal computers.
Right. And that led to, huge growth in the software market.
It was a brilliant strategy. But didn't Apple try to counter this with their own approach?
They did. In 1984, Apple launched the Macintosh. And it was a radical departure from the IBM PC.
The Macintosh, I remember that. The one with that iconic Super Bowl ad, the woman throwing the hammer at the big screen.
Yeah, it was all about breaking free from conformity. The Mac was all about a graphical user interface, a mouse, no more typing commands, icons, windows, making computing intuitive.
Yeah, the Mac really focused on user-friendliness.
It showed that computers could be powerful and easy to use. But while the Mac was gaining popularity, especially in those creative fields, the IBM PC and all its clones running MS-DOS and later Windows, they really continued to dominate the market.
So it was like these two different paths. The IBM PC focusing on compatibility and business, the Mac championing user-friendliness and creativity, but either way, personal computing was exploding.
For sure. So where do we go from here?
Well, the internet, that's got to be the next big leap, right? When did that enter the picture?
Well, the internet, it's got a long history.
Yeah.
The seeds were planted back in the 60s, but it really started taking shape in the 80s. And a key turning point, that was the invention of the World Wide Web.
The World Wide Web, the web. Hard to imagine life without it now. But back then, it was just this obscure research project, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Ah.
1989, Tim Berners-Lee, he created it at CERN, the physics lab in Switzerland.
CERN, the place where they smash atoms.
That's the one. So the web, it was actually designed to help researchers share information more easily.
So a scientist trying to solve a problem for himself and his colleagues ends up creating something that connects billions of people worldwide. It's an incredible story. But wasn't the early web pretty text-heavy?
It was very text-based.
Yeah.
But then came Mosaic in 1993.
Mosaic, okay. What was that?
It was the first graphical web browser that let you view images alongside text, made the web way more appealing and accessible. And Mosaic's success, it actually led to the creation of Netscape Navigator, which became the most popular browser in the mid-90s.
Netscape Navigator, I remember that. It really was the gateway to this whole new world of information, entertainment, even online communities. And with all those people connected, it wasn't long before businesses started to see the potential, right?
Oh yeah, the mid to late 90s, that's when you had the dot-com boom. Tons of growth, tons of investment in internet companies. Amazon, eBay, Google, they all emerged during this time, transforming how we shop, communicate, access information.
And the internet went from this niche thing to a core part of everyday life.
Totally. And then, in 2007, Steve Jobs, he unveiled the iPhone.
The iPhone. That was a game changer, wasn't it?
It wasn't just a phone, it was like a pocket-sized computer.
Mhm.
This revolutionary touchscreen interface. It brought the internet to the palm of your hand.
It really did. I remember when the iPhone first came out, it felt like the future had arrived.
It was a turning point for sure. It ushered in the era of smartphones and apps. Suddenly, everyone had this powerful computer in their pocket, connected to the internet all the time.
It's amazing to think how far we've come in such a short time.
It's incredible, isn't it? And the pace of innovation, it just keeps accelerating.
So what's next for computing? What's on the horizon? What has you excited or maybe even a little bit concerned?
Well, there are some really exciting and maybe a little unnerving possibilities out there. We're on the verge of breakthroughs in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, even brain-computer interfaces. Stuff that could totally change what it means to be human.
Brain-computer interfaces, quantum computing. Okay, now I'm really intrigued. We'll have to dive into those topics after a quick break. We'll be right back to explore what the future holds for the world of computers.
Welcome back. Okay, so we've traveled through like 5,000 years of computer history, from those simple counting tools to the smartphones we have in our pockets today. But now let's step into the future. What's next for computing? What kind of mind-blowing technologies are on the horizon?
Well, one area that's super exciting and maybe a bit unsettling is brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs for short.
BCIs, okay. Remind me, what's that all about again? Imagine a world where you can, control devices just with your thoughts, or download information straight into your brain.
That sounds like something out of science fiction. Is that even possible?
It might be closer than you think. BCIs are already being used, in medical settings to help people who are paralyzed regain control of their limbs.
Oh, right. I've heard about that.
Researchers are working on these implants that allow people to control, robotic arms, wheelchairs, even computer cursors, just by thinking about it.
Wow, that's incredible. So it's starting with these medical applications, but the potential goes way beyond that, right?
So yeah, for sure. Imagine, being able to learn a new language or a new skill instantly by downloading it straight to your brain. Or, communicating telepathically with others.
Telepathy. That would change everything.
It's a world with some crazy possibilities. But of course, there are also some potential risks we got to think about.
Yeah, that makes sense. Merging our minds with machines, I can see how that could lead to some ethical dilemmas.
Definitely. Things like security, privacy, even how we define what it means to be human. These are all things we have to consider very carefully as this technology advances.
It's a lot to unpack, but it's definitely fascinating to think about the possibilities. Okay, so you also mentioned quantum computing. I've heard the term before, but honestly, I'm still a bit fuzzy on what it actually is and why it's such a big deal.
So quantum computing, it's a completely different way of processing information. You know how traditional computers use bits, which can be either a 0 or a 1?
Right, that's the basic building block of digital information.
Exactly. Well, quantum computers, they use qubits. And qubits can be a 0, a 1, or both at the same time.
Both at the same time? Wait, how is that even possible?
It's this mind-bending concept from quantum mechanics called superposition. But think of it like a coin spinning in the air. Before it lands, it's both heads and tails at the same time, right?
I think I see what you mean. So qubits are like spinning coins. They can be in multiple states at once.
Exactly. And that's what gives quantum computers this crazy power. They can explore many possibilities simultaneously, doing these parallel calculations.
It's like having a supercomputer that can explore millions of paths at the same time.
Yeah, something like that.
So what kind of problems could we solve with that kind of power?
Oh man, so many. Quantum computers, they could revolutionize things like medicine, material science, artificial intelligence. We could develop new drugs, design totally new materials, even create AI systems that are way more sophisticated than what we have today.
It sounds like quantum computing could help us tackle some of humanity's biggest challenges.
It definitely has the potential.
So how far off is all this? Are we talking years, decades, centuries?
Quantum computing, it's still in those early stages of development, but things are moving fast. You've got companies like Google, IBM, Microsoft. They're pouring resources into it, and there are breakthroughs happening all the time.
So it's not just a pipe dream.
Not at all. It's realistic to think that quantum computers could become, commercially viable within the next decade or two.
That's not that far off. It seems like we're on the cusp of some pretty incredible advancements in computing.
Absolutely. It's a really exciting time to be following this field.
Well, this has been an amazing journey exploring the past, present, and future of computers, from those humble beginnings with counting beads to the potential of quantum leaps in computing power. Who knows what the future holds, but one thing is for sure, it's going to be incredible.
It definitely is. And remember, technology is a tool, and it's up to all of us to make sure those tools are used for good.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of computers. We hope you've enjoyed the ride and that you'll keep exploring and learning about the ever-changing world of technology. Until next time, stay curious.